Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. U.S. recovers $53 million legally awarded contracts involving Diezani Alison Madueke, Aluko and Omokore. Outside Nigeria, Sri Lanka's government announces cuts in fuel prices after a year of fuel shortages. At least 38 people have died at a migrant processing center in Mexico. My name is Femi Olanikpeku. Now the news in detail. The Justice Department of the United States has announced the final resolution of two civil cases seeking the forfeiture of various luxury assets that were the proceeds and were laundered in and through the United States. Documents from the Justice Department showed that the laundry cases involved former Minister of Petroleum Resources Diezani Alison Madueke and two of her business partners, Kolawole Aluko and Olajide Omokore. At the conclusion of the cases, the department said it recovered roughly $53.1 million in cash, constituting the net liquidated value of the defendant's assets, plus a promissory note with a principal value of $16 million. According to court papers from 2011 to 2015, businessmen Aluko and Omokore conspired with others to pay bribes to Diezani, who at the time oversaw the nation's state oil company. In return, Diezani used her influence to sell lucrative oil contracts to companies owned by Aluko and Omokore. According to the department, the proceeds of those illicitly awarded contracts totaling more than $100 million were then laundered in and through the United States and used to purchase various assets through shell companies, including luxury real estate in California and New York. The vice chairman of the All Progressives Congress APC Northwest, Salihu Lukman, has urged the party to consider zoning the Senate President position and the 10th National Assembly to the South-South zone. Lukman, in an open letter to the party today, cited previous tenures in the federal legislature and rationale behind the geopolitical zones to produce its leadership. He warned that the Muslim ticket of Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Kashim Shettima would mean an unregulated contest. Leadership of the 10th National Assembly could produce another Muslim as Senate President. The party's vice chairman suggested compensating the South-South for giving more votes to the APC, including winning the governorship election in Cross River and majority members of the Edo State House of Assembly. The APC stalwart also spoke out against people from the Northwest declaring to contest for the position of Senate President without consulting any member of from Northwest in National Working Committee. And ahead of the governorship primaries in Bayelsa, Imo, and Kogi states, the Labour Party says the nomination fee for aspirants has been reduced from 25 million naira to 15 million naira. A spokesperson for the Obidati Presidential Campaign Council, Kenneth Okonkwo, in a series of tweets on Monday, had cried out over the 25 million naira governorship nomination fee, describing it as exorbitant. However, today, Okonkwo took to Twitter to share the revised charge for the Labour Party governorship nomination forms. According to him, the Labour Party had taken note of the suggestions of Nigerians that a party of working-class Nigerians should settle for a nomination fee of no more than 15 million naira for the post of a governor. He said the decision came after due consultation with relevant stakeholders in the party and taking into consideration the overwhelming interest of Nigerians in the party. And outside Nigeria, Sri Lanka's government has announced cuts in fuel prices, providing relief for many after a year of shortages and skyrocketing prices amidst the country's worst economic crisis. Minister of Power and Energy told reporters today that different categories of petrol and diesel will be sold at prices from 8% to 26% lower starting from midnight. The minister said the price reduction was in line with an agreement with the International Monetary Fund, which includes adjusting fuel subsidies and prices based on production cost and global oil prices. Sri Lanka earlier this month secured approval of a $2.9 billion in bailout program, a key step in its recovery from a crisis brought on by the pandemic and other troubles. Last year, severe shortages of food, medicine, and fuel led to street protests that forced then-President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to flee the country and resign. French authorities have searched the Paris offices of 5 banks, including Societe Generale, BNP Paribas, and HSBC, on suspicion of fiscal fraud as part of a broad European program into the dodging of dividend tax payments. The French prosecutors' actions are the latest to hit global banks over the dividend tax fraud scheme, as similar investigations have been conducted in Germany and other European countries. Now, Financial Prosecutor's Office said in a statement that the probe was linked to a cum-ex dividend stripping trading scheme whereby banks and investors swiftly trade shares of companies around their dividend payouts day. The practice aims to block stock ownership and allow multiple parties to legally claim tax rebates and dividends. A French Financial Prosecution Office spokesperson said it was impossible to put an exact figure on the scale of the fraud, but said the banks together faced an overall compensation request of more than $1 billion, including fines and late interest payments. And the European Union has removed Pakistan from its list of high-risk third countries, a move that is expected to improve conditions for business activity. In a statement announcing the news today, Pakistan's Ministry of Commerce said the listing of Pakistan in 2018 had resulted in creating a regulatory burden affecting Pakistani companies doing business with the 27-member bloc. According to the statement, the new development would add to the comfort level of European economic operators and is likely to ease the cost and time of legal and financial transactions by Pakistani entities and individuals in the EU. Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari said in a Twitter post that Pakistani businesses and individuals would no longer be subjected to enhanced customer due diligence by European legal and economic operators. The high-risk third countries list includes nations that, according to the EU, do not have a robust enough regulatory and legal system to prevent financial crimes and terrorism financing that could pose significant threats to the financial system of the bloc. In other news, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reacted angrily to comments by the U.S. president who urged him to walk away from his controversial judicial reform plans. Mr. Netanyahu later tweeted that Israel would make its own decisions, not based on pressures from abroad. It comes after protests this week brought Israel to a standstill, forcing him to pause the proposals. The protests have intensified since Mr. Netanyahu returned to power at the end of last year, leading the most right-wing nationalist government in Israel's history and promising to curb the powers of the judiciary. His plans would give the government full control over the committee which appoints judges and would ultimately strip the Supreme Court of crucial powers to strike down legislation that it saw as effectively unconstitutional. And elsewhere, Italy has moved to ban lab-grown meat to protect food heritage. Italy's right-wing government has backed a bill that would ban laboratory-produced meat and other synthetic foods, highlighting Italian food heritage and health protection. If the proposals go through, breaking the ban would attract fines of up to 60,000 euros. Francesco Lobardriga, who runs the rebranded Ministry of Agriculture and Food Sovereignty, spoke of the importance of Italy's food tradition. The farmers' lobby praised the move, but it was a blow for some animal welfare groups which have highlighted lab-made meat a solution to issues including protecting the environment from carbon emissions and food safety. The proposed bill came hard on the heels of series of government decrees banning the use of flour derived from insects such as cricket and low-cost in pizza and pasta. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that unless his country wins a months-long battle in the eastern city of Bakhmut, Russia may begin building international support for a peace deal that could require Ukraine to make unacceptable compromises. He also invited the leader of China, long aligned with Russia, to visit Ukraine. President Zelensky said if Bakhmut falls to Russian forces, President Vladimir Putin would sell the victory to the West, to his society, to China, and to Iran. China, which is economically aligned and politically favorable towards Russia for decades, has provided President Putin diplomatic cover by staking out an official position of neutrality in the war. She visited Putin in Russia last week, raising the prospect Beijing might be ready today to provide Moscow with weapons and ammunition it needs to refill its depleted stockpile. But President Xi's trip ended without any such announcement. You are watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break.
Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was an anti-apartheid activist who gave his all for the elimination of what has been described as the world's most vicious rule of the unjust and man's inhumanity against man. He was born July 18, 1918 in Mvezo, South Africa. Educated and trained as a successful legal practitioner, he took up the gauntlet of a human activist against segregation by the minority white suprematists in South Africa. At the climax of his trial for treason, orchestrated by the minority South African government, the great crusader for democratic equality was prepared to pay the supreme sacrifice to establish majority rule in his native land. He told white jurists that if achieving freedom for his people was worth his life, he was prepared to die. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island, described as the most notorious prison in the world. It was from this same prison that he came out as a free man, as South Africa's first black president in 1994. Western Spring Television identifies Nelson Mandela as a watershed character in history. Born Jeremiah 6, 1905, Oba 1955-1958, Obafemi Awolowo's premiership witnessed pioneering in multi-sectoral policy initiatives and execution. The Western region under his administration paraded several enviable records. First television station in Africa, first real estate in Nigeria, first high-rise building in Nigeria, first modern sports stadium in Nigeria, first agricultural settlement in Nigeria, first modern civil service secretariat in Nigeria, and first industrial estate in Nigeria. His face is on 100 Naira denomination as a mark of honor for his distinguished services to his country. Western Spring Television identifies Obafemi Awolowo as a major character in history.
Thank you so much for staying with us. At least 38 people have died at a migrant processing fire that officials say started during a protest against deportations. Many of the victims had traveled from Central and South America trying to get to the U.S. The city, located across Rio Grande River from El Paso, Texas, has seen an influx of people in recent weeks. Many have been heading to the U.S. border in expectation of an end to the Title 42, a pandemic-era policy which gives the U.S. government the power to quickly expel migrants trying to cross its border. Mexican President Andrés Obrador said migrants had set mattresses ablaze. The UK government has announced plans to put thousands of asylum seekers in disused military bases to accommodate their essential living needs and nothing more. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick confirmed plans to house migrants at former RAF sites in Essex and Lincolnshire despite legal threats from local conservatives. A separate site on private land in Bexhill, East Sussex, will also be used, while Mr. Jenrick said Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is showing leadership by bringing forward proposals to use barracks in Catterick Garrison in his constituency. Mr. Jenrick told the Commons that the government remained committed to its legal obligations to house the destitute. In Scotland, cruise ships have been used to house Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war.
This government remains committed to meeting our legal obligations to those who would otherwise be destitute. But we're not prepared to go further. Accommodation for migrants should meet their essential living needs and nothing more. Because we cannot risk becoming a magnet for the millions of people who are displaced and seeking better economic prospects.
President Tsai Ing-wen has maintained that Taiwan, as she embarked on a diplomatic mission to Central America today, which will include transit in the United States, and has already been condemned by China. Tsai departed Taiwan today for a 10-day trip in which she will make stopovers in New York City and Los Angeles on either side of official visits to Guatemala and Belize. Pressure will not stop Taiwan's determination from moving towards international society.
President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan is heading to the U.S., laying out a diplomatic agenda to strengthen ties with the West. She is expected to meet Speaker Kevin McCarthy next week, risking a show of force from China, which opposes any such exchanges.
External pressure will not hinder our determination to go global. We are calm and confident. We will not succumb, and we will not provoke others.
China, which claims democratically ruled Taiwan as its own territory, has repeatedly warned U.S. officials not to meet Tsai, viewing it as support for the island's desire to be seen as a separate country.
美方费尽心机，在一个中国原则问题上玩弄文字游戏。但我想提醒美方的是，世界上没有任何力量，包括美国在内，能够阻挡中国人民实现国家完全统一的步伐。世界上也没有任何力量，包括美国在内，能够挽救台独势力失败的命运。美国违背在台湾问题上所做的承诺，如果在错误的道路上走下去，我们正告美方。
Way back. Though not officially confirmed, she is expected to meet McCarthy while in California at the end of a 10-day trip. Tsai says external pressure will not hinder their determination to go to the world at Taiwan's main international airport at Taoyuan, in a veiled reference to China, stating further that they were calm and confident and will neither yield nor provoke. The wild side's due to arrive in New York early Wednesday afternoon. Speaking in Beijing shortly before Tsai left, Xu Fenglian, spokesperson of China's Taiwan Affairs Office, said Tsai's transits of the United States were not just her waiting at the airport or hotel, but for her to meet U.S. officials and lawmakers. Fenglian stressed peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. To these, the firmly oppose and will definitely take measures to resolutely fight back, Xu said without giving details.
We urge the U.S. to strictly abide by the One China principle and the 3 China-U.S. joint statements, not let Tsai Ing-wen transit through the U.S. or even contact U.S. officials.
Tsai's transits will come at a time when U.S. relations with China are at what some analysts see as the worst level since Washington normalized ties with Beijing in 1979 and switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei. This comes at a time when Taiwan's ex-president Ma Ying-jeou became on Monday the first sitting of former Taiwanese leader to visit mainland China since the Communist Revolution in 1949 at the end of a civil war with the Communists. Ma said he hoped to bring about peace and improve relations. The former leader was in office from 2008 to 2016. Taiwan's leading DPP criticized Ma for going on Monday, saying it was inappropriate given former longtime Taiwan ally Honduras has ended its decade-long diplomatic relations with Taiwan in favor of ties with China, prompting Taipei to accuse Beijing of using coercion and intimidation to lure its few remaining allies. The Honduran Foreign Ministry said on Saturday that the government of Honduras recognizes the existence of just one China in the world. Although Ma is not scheduled to meet any senior Chinese officials while there, the head of his foundation said last week it will be at his host's disposal if they do arrange such a get-together. Taiwan is China's most sensitive territorial issue and a major bone of contention with Washington, which, like most countries, maintains only unofficial ties with Taipei. However, the United States government is required by U.S. law to provide the island with the means to defend itself. The United States says such transits by Taiwanese presidents are routine and that China should not use size trip to take any aggressive moves against Taiwan. The United States sees no reason for China to overreact to planned transits of the United States this week and next month by Taiwan's president, senior U.S. officials said ahead of Tsai's departure. Tsai had engaged in a range of activities including meetings with members of Congress, the Taiwanese diaspora and other groups. Taiwanese presidents routinely pass through the United States while visiting diplomatic allies in Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, which, although not official visits, are often used by both sides for high-level meetings. Taiwan's government rejects China's sovereignty claims, and while Tsai has reportedly offered talks with Beijing, China has rebuffed Tsai's repeated calls for talks, believing her to be a separatist. She has also said only Taiwan's people can decide their future. Tsai's trip has unnerved security agencies in Taiwan who worry that China could launch a series of influence campaigns, including spreading misinformation on social media platforms to sway public perceptions of Tsai's U.S. transit. China's Taiwan Affairs Office did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but claimed another diplomatic victory over Taiwan on Sunday when one-time loyal Taiwan ally Honduras switched diplomatic recognition to Beijing. Only 13 countries now maintain formal ties with Taiwan. China speaks of itself and Taiwan as belonging to one China and as a Chinese province. The island has no right to any sort of state-to-state ties, meanwhile Taiwan strongly disputes that view.
United States Vice President Kamala Harris has delivered a speech on women empowerment to thousands of young Ghanaians in the capital, Accra, and toured a coastal building that was the last stop for Africans sold into the transatlantic slave trade. Her visit to Ghana, the first stop on an African tour, will also take her to Tanzania and Zambia, and is part of a charm offensive by Washington as it seeks to counterbalance the growing influence of China and Russia on the continent. Harris used the visits to promise American partnership, exhort African nations to do more for women, and to speak about the importance of learning difficult history, and an apparent reference to recent laws in Florida, Georgia, and Texas. In a speech, Harris said by the middle of the century, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. And talking sports, former Manchester United manager Sir Alex Ferguson and ex-Arsenal boss Arsene Wenger today became the first managers to be inducted into the Premier League Hall of Fame. The two men locked horns during a period of intense rivalry, starting in the 1990s, winning 16 English top-flight leagues between them. 81-year-old Ferguson is the most successful manager in Premier League history, guiding Manchester United to 13 titles, while Wenger won the competition 3 times with Arsenal, including going unbeaten in the 2003-2004 season. Ferguson will manage United for more than 26 years, won the inaugural Premier League title in 1992-1993 to deliver the Red Devils' first league success since 1967. Wenger arrived at Arsenal in 1996 as one of the first foreign managers in the Premier League, staying at the club until 2018. And Fulham manager Marco Silva and striker Aleksandar Mitrovic say they regret their actions and have apologized to referee Chris Kavanagh following their red cards at Manchester United. Silva was charged with abusive behavior towards match officials after the 3-1 FA Cup quarter-final loss. Mitrovic was charged with violent and improper conduct after his straight red card for pushing referee Kavanaugh. In a statement, the 45-year-old Silva said he regretted what happened and has spoken to Chris Kavanaugh to apologize. And before we end Spring Global today, here is a recap of our top stories. The Justice Department of the United States has announced the final resolution of 2 civil cases seeking the forfeiture of various luxury assets that were the proceeds of foreign corruption offenses and were laundered in and through the United States. And outside Nigeria, Sri Lanka's government has announced cuts in fuel prices, providing relief for many after a year of shortages and skyrocketing prices amidst the country's worst economic crisis. And at least 38 people have died at a migrant processing center in Mexico in a fire that officials say started during a protest against the deportations. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. My name is Femi Olanipekun. Thanking you so much for watching. Good evening.
According to the words